Hey, it's really nice to have you here. Nice to meet you. My name is Emma, if you are new to this channel, and if not, hi, welcome back. How have you been? I am really looking forward to sitting down with you guys right now and filming this video because I've never done this video before, but I thought it would be fun to go through all of the classics that I read in 2020 and rank them all from my favorites to my least favorites. I read a lot of classics this year, which was really fun, and I'm really looking forward to kind of speaking about them all. I don't think I'm gonna go on any kind of long synopsis-y explanations because we would be here all day, but I'll maybe say like a brief little sentence of what it's about, where it ranks in my list, why, how much I enjoyed it, and maybe something fun about it. So if you would like to see how many classics and what they were that I read in 2020, then you're in the right place. Grab yourself maybe a cup of tea. I have some turmeric tea, currently way too warm to drink, so we'll just let that cool for now, but let's get started. Alright, so I read 27 classics in 2020, which is pretty good. A few of them were on audiobook, but most of them I do have here. Let's just get into it. Coming in at number 27, my least favorite classic that I read this year, but honestly I have to say I enjoyed all of them. I don't think I rated anything lower than 3 stars on this whole list, so that's pretty good. That being said, my least favorite classic of the year was Strange Fiction by H.G. Wells. I find myself not really getting along most of the time with H.G. Wells, his novels, his short stories in this case, because Strange Fiction is a collection of about, I think, 6 or 7 short stories of his, all about science fiction, different things like that. I just really find myself having a hard time connecting with his works or caring too much about them, although I do really like The Island of Dr. Moreau. That's kind of the only exception I've found so far, but Strange Fiction just hosts a whole bunch of weird, creepy, sometimes really interesting science fiction stories. I wasn't loving everything that was happening in them. I didn't find myself really like gripped or held tightly as I imagine the readers of the day would have been, so yeah. I didn't hate it by any means. I still enjoyed reading it, but I think out of all the experiences I've had this year reading classic literature, Strange Fiction definitely ranks at the bottom. That is the first one we have on the list. 26 is Candide by Voltaire. I read this at the start of the year and like it was fine. I honestly don't have too much to say about it. It is a little satire that goes against the notion that all outcomes are the best possible outcomes because we live in the best of all possible worlds, and we follow our protagonist Candide as he goes through life literally having every single horrible thing you could ever imagine ever happen to him, how he survives it, how his philosopher friend keeps telling him, oh, it's okay, everything happens for a reason, everything will work out because this is how it's supposed to be, this is how it's meant to be. So Voltaire is really rebelling against that notion and saying really it doesn't make much sense that you've just decided that everything happens for a reason, everything's the best, when really sometimes things are just cruel and things happen for no particular outcome, reason. There's no logic. So that's kind of what this little book of mostly like philosophy and satire is about. It was fine. It was quite an interesting commentary and conversation to have. It just definitely wasn't the best classic I read all year, and like I really felt that. So it is quite short if you would like to have the experience for yourself, but that is Candide. I do think it's a worthwhile read, but definitely not one I'll be like really excited to return to anytime in the future. Number 25 is another short story. It is because I'm not really a fan of short stories, but I really have to say I really love this. I gave it 4 stars. It just does rank a bit lower because it was quite short. It's quite an early creation of Sylvia Plath's, and that is Maryventura and the Ninth Kingdom. This is an extremely short story detailing Mary, who was actually Sylvia Plath's classmate, I believe, in school, and she takes this trip on a train and quickly finds out her destination is horribly frightening and scary, and so she's trying to do everything in her power to talk to the people on the train, learn how to get off of this train. It was beautifully written. I think it was just such a nice little densely packed short story where every sentence there was something there for you, and I loved it. I loved it so much. Once again though, it was just really short, and I think there were so many other amazing classics I got to experience this year, so it does rank quite low on the list, but I would highly recommend. Coming in at number 24 and 23 actually, we have 2 Agatha Christie novels. Coming in at number 24, I think I would put Murder on the Links first. This one was actually quite good. This is the second book in the Hercule Poirot series. So I couldn't find the first one on audiobook, so I listened to Murder on the Links. This one's set in France, and there's kind of like an arch nemesis that Poirot has to deal with, and there's a murder, obviously, on this kind of golf course that's just being built, the Links, and we follow a whole host of people in the house and the servants and the man's wife, Monsieur Renaud, who's been murdered, and it's just your classic detective story. I loved it. I got to read this in October. It was fun. It was great. I just think standing it up next to a lot of classical works that I read, once again, it does rank quite low. Number 23 would be Death on the Nile, which I enjoyed a little bit more than Murder on the Links. This one is set in Egypt, and we're following a boat, a steam barge, I think, that's going down the Nile quite slowly, and there's a very famous woman there who's murdered, and then Poirot, of course, has to question everyone on the little boat and what's going on. And of course we go to a whole host of really historic kind of ancient Egypt sites, which was interesting, and I know it's being turned into a movie, which is quite exciting, so Death on the Nile did rank a little bit higher. The next book I really loved, and it is The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. I'm so happy that I got to read this one this year. It was so sweet. I remember watching the movie from my childhood, being a little bit scared by it actually, because there's quite a lot of like frightening characters and things that go on. I'm looking at you, Mr. Toad. But this was one of the coziest books I read this year, I have to say. The prose was charming, beautiful, so sweet, so meandering, and just you really felt like you were sinking into the story, taking your time. The Wind in the Willows follows a whole host of animals who are friends. We follow them on their adventures, and more often than not, misadventures, the trouble they get into. We have a toad who's obsessed with cars. We have a badger, quite the grumpy badger, who lives in the woods, and it was just really sweet. It was really sweet. I loved it. So this comes in at number 22. 21, we have the only Jane Austen I read this year, I think, and that was Sense and Sensibility. This is definitely my least favorite of Austen's novels that I've read now. This, I think, was my fourth. Yes, my fourth Austen novel. Pride and Prejudice, of course, still remains my favorite, but Sense and Sensibility was interesting. I just really hated so many of the characters in this book, and of course that does speak a lot to Austen's talent. There's so many funny bits in here. Of course, I always love reading Jane Austen. It's always such a nice, fun, also very cozy time, really uplifting, and I did enjoy Sense and Sensibility, but it's definitely one of, I think, the least memorable classics I had the experience of reading this year, so that's why it's a bit low down on the list, but I'm really glad to have read it. I definitely want to at some point read all of her works, so that's that one. It's a play, and that is Lady Windermere's Fan by Oscar Wilde. I absolutely adored it. I love it. This is an extremely short little play. We're following Lady Windermere. She loses her fan. And there's just so much about Victorian society and Oscar Wilde's wit and his prose and just his beautiful, beautiful way with words. I loved it. This year I got to read so much Oscar Wilde, and I'm so happy that I did, because I absolutely adored every single one of his works that I stepped into. Yeah, Lady Windermere is just a fun character to follow in here because there's so much going on, even though of course it's taking place in the span of a few pages, but I really I loved it. So that is number 20. We have The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. I loved it. This was my first time reading it, although it's a story I've definitely grown up with in childhood. I really enjoyed it. I have to say, I still think I prefer the film version, but this one was just such sweet, good fun. Once again, another really cozy book, but we're following a group of 4 siblings, and when they stumble through a wardrobe in England, they are transported into the fantasy world of Narnia, where they quickly find out there is a prophecy about them and this really villainous woman called the White Witch. So they kind of have to see what that is all about and go on this huge adventure to save Narnia from eternal winter and this ruler and stuff like that. And it was really sweet, really nice. Yeah, it was definitely very young. It was a very young classic to read. I mean, it is a children's book, but I really enjoyed the experience. So, number 17, I'm really glad I got to read the Symposium by Plato this year. This was really good fun, honestly. I found so much in here that I was so interested in and would love to explore more in the future, especially the end, I think, couple of speeches where they talk about humans and our kind of nature and our genesis as being born connected to another person, and one person is really 2 people, and we go about our lives essentially trying to track down that other person who was like at one point fused to us. That was so interesting. Oh my gosh, I loved it. But if you don't know what the Symposium is about, it's basically a drinking party where a whole bunch of men get together and discuss what they think love is, what the nature of love is about, what merits, what values, what pros, what cons, what love is, and how it affects life and humanity and everything like that. I loved it. I loved it. It was great. I'm really glad I got to read it because I've never read it before, so definitely another one that I would recommend. Number 16, we have a book that like I'm still a little bit ambivalent about, and I'm not quite too sure what I really still think about it. It is Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. Yeah, I don't know. I read this in February. First time reading Dostoevsky, first time reading Crime and Punishment. So affected by it. I was so impacted and affected by it. It put me in the worst mood I think ever, and it was so interesting to see the effect it had. This follows a very poor student. We're in Russia and he's extremely poor. He thinks that puts him above the moral law. His name is Raskolnikov, and so he commits a murder. It's basically what sets this book off. And from there we follow his extreme guilt and him worrying about what's going on. A detective comes around and all of this stuff. Of course we have a whole bunch of characters and a whole host more things happen than that, but I'm just really not too sure what to think about it. Like I think I enjoy the experience more of having finished it and being able to sit and think about it and kind of having the story with me rather than actually enjoying the experience of reading it. I do think since February I just feel like I've read so much, and I think I would actually enjoy this so much more now, even though it's not quite been a year yet. But I'm really excited to read this again and again, honestly. And just see how my thoughts change about it. But overall, I did enjoy it. I'm just still, I don't know. I think it's just because it affected me so much, but regardless, I think it's a book I'm really glad to have read. So that is number 17. Number 15 is a book that I really love, and now as we're getting kind of into my top 15, it's really hard to put these in actual order. So I do just want to say that, but I love this book. I read it in December. And that is Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. This was also my first James Baldwin, and I was blown away. I adored it. If you've never heard of Giovanni's Room, this follows a man. Doesn't really follow Giovanni, although he is one of our central characters. It follows a man called David, and he comes to Paris looking to find himself, but he ends up losing himself in this man named Giovanni and in Giovanni's room because they develop this relationship with each other. It's the 1950s, and things are quite hard for David, deeply struggling with his sexuality, who he is. He's constantly being barraged by these letters from home, from his father, beseeching him to come back to America and all of this stuff. And it is a really painful book to read. It's a really hard book to read emotionally, following David and Giovanni, their relationship. There's also a woman that David is in a relationship with, and it's just this huge, complicated thing that it just really affected me as well. Like Crime and Punishment, those are two, I think, of the most heavily emotionally affecting books I read this year. Giovanni's Room was just, James Baldwin is just so talented, and his writing in this book, the symbolism, the imagery, just, it was all so good. So good in its devastating effects. So I would really recommend, but wow, I'm so looking forward to reading more James Baldwin next year. I was so impressed with this story. I read a Shakespeare play this year, and it ranks in at number 15. That is A Midsummer Night's Dream. I was honestly a little bit disappointed with this just because I think I had so many expectations, but I really enjoyed it. No matter what, I did really love it, of course I did, but it was just a really fun, lighthearted comedy. It does have some serious bits put in there, but I just really love Shakespeare's writing, obviously. What else am I gonna say? But there were some really nice lines and pieces in here, and I was so happy to find so many wonderful kind of lines and things I would love to memorize, and just really beautiful language that just glittered and glistened. I loved it. I would love to see this performed because I've never had that experience, but yeah, I really did enjoy this. Very much looking forward to reading more Shakespeare very soon. So that is A Midsummer Night's Dream. Some more Oscar Wilde, another of his plays. We have Salome. I did rank this one higher than the previous two plays I've mentioned, just because like the language in this one, I just feel like he really had the opportunity to be so decadent, because this is a play about, in a sense, decadence and richness. We're set at King Herod's feasting hall, and we follow Salome, who is his stepdaughter. And of course, we also have his wife there. We have his whole kind of court there, and it's just a one-act tragedy, but it is so devastating. There's so much awfulness in this book, in this play, but there's also so much beauty, and like the themes that he explores in here, the writing that he lets these people say in here, it's just so beautiful. I was blown away. I'm just always so impressed by what he chooses to actually put down and how he chooses to talk about things. There's a whole theme in here that I loved of the gaze, what different people's vision does to things, what different people's vision does to different people. It was just absolutely beautiful. So yeah, that is Salome. I loved it. Definitely one of my favorite wilds I've read. Haven't read actually too many of them, but loved it. Number 12 is The Castle of Otranto by Horace Walpole. This is really high up because this is one of the first Gothic stories and Gothic novels. I didn't really know what to expect, but like I don't think anything could have prepared me for the weirdness, the wackiness, the strangeness that was actually in this book. It was just so strange. We are following Manfred, who is the Prince of Otranto, and he's desperately trying to marry off his son Conrad to a lady named Isabella. But the very first page of this book begins with Conrad being crushed by a giant helmet. So he's out of the picture from page 1. From there, Manfred turns to Isabella, and we kind of learn that there's this prophecy about the Principality of Otranto that says the rightful owner of the castle and Principality of Otranto will inherit it again once the original owner of Otranto grows too large to inhabit it. So it's kind of this weird, wacky journey. There's so many little bits and pieces in here. There's romance, there's murder, there's mystery, there's skeletons. Just like nothing could have prepared me for the strangeness that envelops the Castle of Otranto. It's a book that like I couldn't take too spooky. Like there were some cool, of course, very traditional Gothic spooky parts, but more than that, I just found it really funny. And that was honestly fine. I loved it. It was so strange, so wacky. I would love to read it again. I read it around Halloween, so really enjoyed. Would really recommend if you like to go on a strange kind of low budget haunted house fever dream ride. I think this is the perfect choice. We have If Not Winter. This is Fragments of Sappho translated by the one, the only Anne Carson, light of my life. So I rated this 5 stars. I was absolutely enamored by the little small fragments that Anne Carson translates. There was just so much there, and like they're not very long. Like let me show you. I really wanted to sip of that tea, but now I'm too excited. They're very short little fragments, almost this whole thing, but they just like invite you into so much consideration and like thinking about what Sappho would have written there, what could be on the page, and like what Anne Carson leaves for you. The language is so beautiful, like so beautiful. Yeah, I was just blown away. I loved learning too about the Greek because this does come with the ancient Greek on one side, and it was just so nice to like speak it out loud. It felt like you were casting a little bit of a spell. Some of these are just so devastating. Someone will remember us, I say, even in another time. Invisible too, in Hades' house, you will go your way among dim shapes, having been breathed out. Like, oh my gosh. Oh my goodness. All right, number 11 is A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. I have recently just finished reading this. This was such a fun time. 2020 was the year I finally read Dickens for the first time. This was my first time reading A Christmas Carol. I would highly recommend. It was so fun. The writing was beautiful. I adored it. It made me so emotional, which I wasn't really expecting. It really hit home, especially the scenes with the ghost of Christmas past. Like, it's just so sad and heavy, and like I was really affected, which I just didn't know what happened. So I just really, it has to be this high up because I adored it. I loved it so much. So that is A Christmas Carol. Number 10, we have Great Expectations by Charles Dickens, which I did enjoy more than A Christmas Carol. I loved it. This was my first Dickens book ever in my whole entire life. I just freaking fell in love with it. It was incredible. It was amazing. This follows Pip, who is a young boy, and he is offered the opportunity via an anonymous benefactor to be a gentleman and enter into high London society. So he moves to London, moves away from his sister and his brother-in-law in the country, comes to London, and you follow basically his life, adjusting to the city, adjusting to his new position. And he's such a nice character to follow. There's so many people I love in here. There's so many spooky elements. There's so many lighthearted elements. I just really enjoyed it. I was so touched touched. It's a book I've thought about for a really long time since finishing, and I adore it. So that is number 10. Are we on 10? We're in the top 10, so this is my top 10. Number 9, I have We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. First Shirley Jackson book. I loved it. I loved it so much. I know many people consider this a modern classic, but just for the sake of this video, I lumped the two together because it's all the same to me. It's all good books. So We Have Always Lived in the Castle, two sisters, a big spooky mansion, a town full of people who hate them, a potential huge mass murder that's gone on in the family, leaving the rest of these sisters' family dead. And it's just so strange, so ambiguous, so weird, so wacky. I almost said Mary Shelley. Shirley Jackson's writing. I loved it. It just really like fit what I wanted from the story. I'm so interested in reading more of her works, and I really would recommend. I don't think it's a book for everyone because there's so many elements that a lot of people dislike in novels, but I think for me it just really worked for me, and I absolutely loved it. So that is number 9. Number 8 is The Broken Wings by Khalil Gibran. If you've seen my best books of the year video, I'm gonna warn you, you're probably gonna see all of the books I mentioned in there, but at least this is kind of ranking them all in classic order, I guess. So The Broken Wings is a tragic love story set in Lebanon following two people who fall in love. They're destined to be torn apart, unfortunately. What I loved most about this was Gibran's writing. His beautiful poetic language was just wow, something I didn't know I needed in my life. This was my introduction to him. Once again this year, I've just been so blessed discovering like so many authors. These are like my first time reading a lot of their works for the first time, so I absolutely was blown away. So impressed. I can't wait to read more of his works because I have a lot more of them on my shelf waiting for me, so I would really highly recommend. I completely forgot to mention The Little Princess by Frances Hodgson Burnett. I think this is technically my 10th, so it's not actually Great Expectations. I would put this below Dickens, so like that's where it fits. I completely forgot about this one, but this was so sweet, so cozy. I would highly recommend. It is a children's book. Loved it. Number 6 is Prometheus Unbound by Percy Bysshe Shelley, another play. I read this so early in the year and it's remained so high on my list for so long, which is so nice, so cool. This was just beautiful. This is about Prometheus. It's based on Aeschylus's play Prometheus Bound, but of course Percy Bysshe Shelley kind of takes that and turns it upside down. I would really recommend. The language in here is just like gold. Loved it so much. Highly recommend. Number 5 is Stories of God by Rilke. This didn't make my favorites cut just because I put a different work of Rilke's on there, a collection of his letters, but I guess this one is also a classic because it's a collection of 13 stories all about God, and it's basically him talking to children in these stories because they're meant for a young audience, but anyone at all can enjoy them. Of course, Rilke had to be on here. He's my favorite ever. So happy I got to read more of him this year, and this really was so nice, so comforting. I loved seeing one of his earliest works that he put out and how he's developed since then, and I loved it so much. I can't even express. Number 4, we have The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. I am very shocked that it is up this high, but this is also a book that I've been thinking about since I finished reading it, and if that happens, you know it's a really good book. So this is another Gothic ghost story, Victorian ghost story. I love that I got to read so much of the Gothic this year because it has been my favorite genre for so long, but this year I feel like I really delved into a lot of brand new ones for me, which was nice. So this one was just so nice. Once again, I don't think this is one for everyone because it is just so ambiguous. There's so much unknown in here, but I really did end up loving the writing in this book, which surprised me because when I first started it, I was like, this is incredibly dense, incredibly hard to break through to try and see what is actually being said here, but that's so much involved in the plot of this story where we follow a governess who's taking care of these 2 young children, and there's so much she is trying to shake out of them, just like the reader is trying to shake out of this book, and it was just a really, like, a big experience is what I would describe reading this book. Very just mind-blowing, and I loved it. So that is Turn of the Screw. All right, number 3, the top 3 classics of the year. We have The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. I can't believe this was my first time reading it ever in my life. It was incredible. I cried reading this book because it was that beautiful. It was too beautiful, and I cried. This was just so incredible. I think it deserves all the hype it's ever received and continues to receive. It's just like on a whole other level, on a whole other planet, and I really want to read this book like once a year, I think. I know right now on my Discord, I think they've started January 1st. A whole bunch of you guys are reading it together on the Discord server in the description if you would like to join along with them. There's quite a number of people doing it, so that should be really, really fun. I can't wait to see what you guys think about it because it's just, I read it in February and it's remained in my top 3 books all year. So I think that speaks enough for itself. One of the most beautiful things I've ever laid my eyes on. Still can't believe this actually exists in the world of literature. That's how good it was. And yeah. I think number 2, that of course is Phantom of the Opera by Gaston Leroux. Shocker that it's not number 1. I do have to say, I think a lot of the classics I've mentioned previous to Phantom of the Opera, they are, not that they have more literary value, because what is literary value, but I just think there's a lot more important books than Phantom of the Opera out there is what I'm trying to say. But it's just been a childhood favorite. It is one of my favorite stories. I just have so much bias to this book that can't be ignored. I don't speak about this book or think about this book with any kind of objectivity at all, just to get that out there. This book has always been a huge part of my life and I can't ignore that. It's just always been there for me, and it's one of my favorite stories of all time, even knowing that like a lot of these books I've mentioned are much more, I guess, important works of literature, a lot of people would argue, but it doesn't really matter to me. So this has to be up here because I just absolutely love it with my whole soul. And yeah, however, there's one book that did top it and is like leagues above it in my opinion. One of the best books, probably the best book I've ever read in my life, let's be honest, if it tops Phantom. And that is 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Wow. This is a book I've thought about almost every single day since finishing it. This is just outstanding. One of the most brilliant book I've ever read. I'm so excited to read it again and like properly annotate it because I was just so overwhelmed reading it for the first time that I didn't even know what was happening to me. It was like a wholly transformative experience. I would really, really recommend this book. There's so much in it, like every single sentence, and it is quite a lengthy book. It's so jam full of so much. I finished it and I just kind of sat there, like I think almost in tears, like what had just happened to me? What had I just read? Haven't had quite the momentous experience that I've had with 100 Years in a long time. And there's so few books that like really, really do that to you and like really feel like they've ripped your whole world apart and built it back up. But this book really managed to do that. The writing was so beautiful. The plot was so beautiful. There's a lot of history that's worked into here. There's a lot of really beautiful language. I just don't have anything bad to say about this book. This is probably my favorite book of all time. Not my favorite book, the best book I've ever read. It's definitely my top. I can't even pick a favorite. So anyway, I think a book that everyone should read before they die. And I know I'm gonna read it many more times. So yeah, this is number 1. This is also my favorite book of the year. Spoilers, but here we are. And yeah, so thank you so much for coming along with me on this classic literature journey that I took this year. Let me know what your favorite classic of the year was. I'm really excited for next year because of course we do have some plans and we're going to be reading some more classics. And if you would like to join us, I know the Dark Academics Book Club will of course be reading a lot of classics next year. Our first one will be Julius Caesar in February. And of course Carolyn and I and our secret project, we will be reading a classic every single month or every 2 months. Our first one will be Childhood, Boyhood, Youth by Leo Tolstoy. And then after that in February, we will be reading The Pickwick Papers by Charles Dickens if you would like to join us. And yeah, I'm really excited to see what more classics I can pick off my bookshelf for this year, this new year. And yeah, I'm really happy with what I read, honestly. I found a ton of new favorites this year and I'm just so thankful that, yeah, I got to read and listen to a lot of really great books. So thank you so much for watching. I hope this was fun and I shall see you very soon in my next video. If there's any videos you would like to see from me, particularly about classics, maybe specific one book reviews or talking about a certain author or just a reading vlog on any classic, please don't hesitate because I'm always open to suggestions. So thank you so much for watching and I will see you very soon. Ciao.